He didn't find out from a spy. He didn't find out from a rival. He found out from a wedding invitation sitting on his own kitchen table, addressed to his name, listing a bride he had never chosen. Adrian Voss stood in the silence of his penthouse at 2 in the morning, holding that envelope, and felt something crack open behind his sternum that no bullet had ever managed to reach. If you've ever watched someone you love get traded away like a business asset, drop a comment below with the city you're watching from. Let me see how far this story has traveled. Hit that like button and stay with me until the end, because what this family does to each other will cost every single one of them something they cannot get back. The city never fully went dark. That was something Adrian Voss had learned before he was old enough to shave. New York breathed at night the same way it breathed during the day, just slower, meaner, with fewer people watching. From the 42nd floor of the Voss Tower on the west side of Manhattan, you could see the grit of it all, the orange smear of streetlights bleeding into the black water of the Hudson, the crawl of headlights on the bridge, the clusters of lit windows in buildings where other people lived other lives and had no idea that the man standing at the glass above them had personally ordered the collapse of 3 city council campaigns, 2 federal investigations, and 1 very inconvenient marriage that had threatened to expose his operation 6 years ago. He was 38 years old. He looked older when he didn't sleep, and he hadn't slept properly in 11 days. The invitation was still in his hand. He had not put it down since he'd found it 40 minutes ago on the marble kitchen island, propped against a crystal bowl of fruit that his housekeeper restocked every Monday. The envelope was cream-colored, thick stock, the kind that costs more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. His full name was printed on the front in a typeface that probably had a name Adrian didn't know and didn't care to learn. Inside, on matching cardstock, were the words that had been rotating in his skull ever since. The Voss family and the Ray family cordially announced the forthcoming union of Adrian James Voss and Isabella Catherine Ray. A date? A venue? The Pemberton Estate in Connecticut, which seated 400, no question mark anywhere on the page. He set the card down on the glass of the window so he could see the city behind it. His reflection looked back at him, jaw tight, the scar along his left temple catching the ambient light, the collar of his shirt open because he'd loosened it sometime around midnight when the back of his neck had started to sweat. He looked like a man who had been told something he already knew and was still somehow surprised by it. He pressed his thumb against the embossed lettering of his own name and felt the raised texture of it and thought, very quietly, that his mother had made a significant miscalculation. Mott. Victoria Voss kept offices on the 14th floor of the same building, which she had insisted upon when Adrian had taken over operational control of the family interests 8 years ago. She'd wanted to stay close, she'd said. She wanted to be available, she'd said. Adrian had given her the floor. A full floor, corner office, her own staff, her own phone lines, because it had felt, at the time, like the reasonable thing to do for a woman who had held the Voss name together through 4 years of his father's illness, and another 2 after the funeral, while Adrian was still learning which men to trust and which to have watched. He respected her. He had always respected her. That was not the same thing as trusting her. He took the elevator down at 2:47 in the morning, still in his shirt and trousers, no jacket. The security team in the lobby saw him coming, and the one nearest the elevator bank straightened automatically, which Adrian ignored. He crossed to the stairwell that connected the residential floors to the office tower and went up 2 flights instead of down 14, which he sometimes did when he needed to think in a straight line. And then he stopped on the landing and leaned against the concrete wall and looked at the ceiling. Isabella Ray. He knew the name. He knew the family. Old money, new connections. A father who had spent 15 years building a real estate portfolio that overlapped neatly with 3 of the Voss organization's primary money-moving operations. A strategic marriage. Of course. Of course it was strategic. Everything his mother did was strategic. She slept strategically. She breathed strategically. The question that was burning a hole in the center of his chest was not why. He understood why. The question was when. When had she started this? How far had it gone? And how much of it had happened while he was sitting across a dinner table from her pretending they were a functional family? And the other question, the one underneath that one, the one he hadn't said out loud yet, even inside his own head, does Elena know? Elena Marcelli lived in a four-room apartment in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn, which she had chosen because the rent was reasonable and the street had a bakery that opened at 5 in the morning. She had told Adrian once, very early on, that she could tell the quality of a neighborhood by whether its bakeries started before dawn, because that meant working people lived there, people with early shifts and long commutes, people who needed something warm in their hands before the day got its teeth into them. He had filed that away. He filed most of what she said away. She didn't talk the way the people around him talked. She didn't calculate the weight of a sentence before she released it, didn't position her words for effect. She just said the things she meant, quietly, and if you weren't paying attention, you could miss it entirely. He had never missed it. That had surprised him initially about himself. He was a man who had trained himself to listen for the gap between what people said and what they wanted, the pause where the real information lived. With Elena, there was no gap. What she said was what she wanted. It had taken him almost 4 months to believe that was real, and not a performance so sophisticated he couldn't detect the seams. He called her at 3 in the morning. She picked up on the third ring, voice rough with sleep but not alarmed. She had learned over the past 2 years not to be alarmed by his hours. "Yeah," she said, "just that." "Did you know?" he said. A pause. Not the pause of someone constructing a lie. The pause of someone who has been half asleep and is now fully awake and trying to understand the shape of the question. "Know what?" she said. "There's an invitation. My mother. A wedding." The silence on her end lasted longer this time. He heard her breathing change, the small, controlled intake that meant she was sitting up in bed, reorienting. "Tell me what it says," she said. He told her, all of it, the names, the date, the venue. He read it flat, no inflection, the same way he read contracts, and when he was done, Elena didn't say anything for so long he looked at his phone to confirm the line was still connected. "She did this without telling you," Elena said finally. "Yes." "And without telling me." "Yes." Another silence, then, "Are you asking if I helped her?" "I'm asking if you knew." "No." No hesitation, no softening, just the word, direct and dry, and he believed it the same way he always believed her, which was completely and without effort, which was the thing that scared him most about her. "I didn't know. She's never liked me enough to involve me in anything." "She doesn't dislike you," Adrian said, and even as he said it, he heard how hollow it was. "Adrian." Her voice was patient. "She's never said my name in a room where it wasn't necessary. She looks at me the way you look at something on the bottom of your shoe. I think that qualifies." He didn't argue. He turned away from the stairwell landing and started moving again, back toward the elevator, because stillness was making him feel like the walls were tightening. "I'm coming over," he said. "It's 3 in the morning." "I know what time it is." "I have work at 7. "I know," he said. "I'll be gone by 6. She didn't tell him not to come. That was one of the things about Elena. She didn't perform reluctance when she didn't feel it. "Okay," she said. "I'll leave the door unlocked." He took a car, not the armored SUV his security preferred, but a plain black sedan, and told the driver to take surface streets. He sat in the back and watched the city slide past the window and tried to do what he usually did when something had broken open. Tried to map it, tried to find the structure underneath the problem. Victoria had contacted the Ray family. She had negotiated terms of some kind. She had gotten far enough along in that process to commission printed invitations with a specific date, which meant this was not a preliminary conversation or an exploratory overture. This was a plan that had been in execution long enough to have a timeline. How long? He kept coming back to that. How long had she been building this while he sat at Sunday dinners and quarterly family meetings and listened to her tell him that the organization needed stability, that the pressure from the Del Corvo family in the Bronx was creating vulnerabilities, that his personal life needed to be simplified. Simplified. She'd used that word 3 months ago, and he'd taken it as a general observation rather than a directive. That was on him. He looked out at the bridge approach as they crossed into Brooklyn, the water black below, and he thought about Isabella Ray. He'd met her twice. Once at a charity event 2 years ago, where they'd exchanged the kind of nothing conversation that happened in rooms like that, and once at a dinner his mother had organized 6 months back, which he had attended because Victoria had told him it was a small gathering for business contacts, and it had in fact been a dinner for 8 that included the Ray family's patriarch, Douglas Ray, and his daughter. Adrian had sat through it and had been polite, and had driven home afterward thinking his mother was making overtures to the Rays for reasons she'd explain when she was ready. He had not pressed. That was also on him. He did not blame himself for trusting his mother. He blamed himself for trusting her without verifying. Those were different things, and the distinction mattered. Elena was in the kitchen when he arrived. The apartment lit up warm and low, a pot of coffee already on the counter in a way that made something in his chest loosen slightly. She was wearing a gray sweatshirt and jeans, and her feet were bare on the tile, and she looked like a person who existed in the world without armor, which was something he had not seen in the people around him in so long that it still hit him sometimes like a soft collision. She looked at him when he came in, the scar, the open collar, the way he was holding his shoulders, and she said, "You've been up for a while." "Yeah." "Sit down." He sat at the small kitchen table, which had 4 chairs and a stack of books on one side that she moved to make room for his elbows. She poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him and pushed one toward him and wrapped her hands around hers. "Start from the beginning," she said, "not the invitation, before that." So he did. He told her about the dinner 6 months ago that he'd thought was a business gathering. He told her about the 3 conversations over the past year in which Victoria had raised, in various framings, the question of his long-term plans, for the organization, for his security, for the family name. He told her about the word simplified and the way it had landed and the way he'd let it pass. He told her about the Del Corvo pressure and the way Victoria had connected it, in multiple conversations, to the idea that a stronger alliance would neutralize external threats. Elena listened to all of it without interrupting. She was good at that in a way that wasn't passive. She listened with her whole face, and when he paused, she didn't rush to fill the space, and the silence she held felt attentive rather than empty. When he was done, she drank some coffee and looked at the table for a moment. Then she said, "She's been planning this for at least a year." "That's my read. And the Ray family is already committed. They printed invitations." "Right." She looked up at him. "So what do you do?" "I haven't decided." She nodded. That was another thing. She didn't push him toward conclusions he wasn't ready to reach. She just asked the question and let it sit. "I'm going to talk to her," he said. "Tomorrow." "That'll be interesting?" "It won't be interesting. It'll be ugly." She didn't contradict him. She looked at her coffee cup, turned it a quarter rotation with her fingers. "Can I tell you something that you might not want to hear?" "Yeah." "She's not wrong that the alliance makes sense," Elena said. "From a pure organization standpoint. I've been around you long enough to understand what the Ray connections would mean. She's not working from a crazy position." He looked at her. "That's not the problem." "I know," she said. "The problem is she did it by deciding for you, which means she's been looking at you and seeing a piece on a board instead of a person for at least a year, probably longer." She paused. "That's what you're actually dealing with, not the invitation. The fact that she thought she could." He said nothing. The coffee was good and strong, and he held the cup with both hands and felt the warmth of it, and looked at the woman across from him who had just said the most accurate thing anyone had said to him in months. "You're not upset about Isabella Ray," Elena added, quieter. "You don't know Isabella Ray. You're upset because your mother drew a boundary around your life without asking if you wanted one there. And because she did it to you," he said. Elena's expression shifted. Not much, but enough. She set her cup down. "She did it about me. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes," she said. "She looked at me and made a decision that I wasn't suitable. That's not personal. That's—" She stopped. Reconsidered. "Okay, it's a little personal, but what she actually did was to you. She decided that what you chose wasn't good enough for the family, and she went around you. That's the thing that should matter to you." He studied her face. "Does it not matter to you?" She held his gaze. "Of course it does. I'm not made of stone." The words were even, but something moved underneath them. Not hurt exactly, more like the controlled acknowledgement of something she'd already made peace with partly and didn't intend to let unravel. But I'm not going to perform a crisis about a woman who never wanted me here in the first place. That would be pathetic. It wouldn't be pathetic. It would feel pathetic to me. She picked up her cup again, which amounts to the same thing. He stayed until almost 5. They talked through most of it. Not strategies, not plans, just the texture of the situation, the way it felt from different angles. Elena had a way of mapping the interior of a problem that he had never encountered in anyone else in his life. And it wasn't strategic the way his own mapping was strategic. It was more like she walked around a thing slowly and looked at it from all sides and said what she noticed without deciding in advance what it meant. At some point, the conversation ran down the way conversations do at 4:30 in the morning, and they sat in companionable quiet for a while. The Brooklyn street outside making its small, early sounds. A truck, a dog somewhere. The distant percussion of the city waking up. And Adrian thought about the fact that he had been in this apartment dozens of times in the past 2 years, and it always felt, improbably, like the most honest room he occupied. He left at 5:20 before the bakery down the street opened. Elena walked him to the door, and at the threshold she stopped him with a hand on his arm, light, just the weight of her fingers through his sleeve. "Hey," she said. He turned. "Whatever you decide to do," she said, "I need you to decide it because of what you actually want, not because of what she did, not to prove something to her, because of what you want." She held his gaze for a moment. "I need that to be the thing that drives it. Do you understand?" He understood. He was not sure, standing there in the pale gray of pre-dawn light coming through the doorway, that he entirely knew what he wanted in the full sense she meant, but he understood her. "Yeah," he said. She let go of his arm. He left. The meeting with Victoria was at 9. He didn't call ahead. He didn't want her to have time to arrange her face or her words or the physical space of the conversation. He came down to the 14th floor at 8:58 and told her assistant, a young man named Robert, who had been in that position for 3 years and had developed a talent for reading the weather of the room, that he was going in. Robert said, "Of course, Mr. Voss. Should I let her know?" "No," Adrian said, and opened the door. Victoria Voss was at her desk, reading something on a tablet, a cup of tea at her elbow. She was 61 years old and looked 53, which she worked at carefully and wore as a kind of quiet armor. She had silver hair cut close and sharp dark eyes that came from the same place his did. And when she looked up and saw him, she did not flinch or look surprised, which told him she had been expecting this conversation even if not precisely this morning. "Adrian," she said. The tone was neutral, not warm, not defensive, just the one word, his name, a placeholder while she organized her position. He set the invitation on her desk. Not hard. He placed it, deliberate, face up. He stood with his hands in his pockets and watched her look at it. "I need you to explain to me," he said, "how far this has gone." She set the tablet down. She folded her hands. "Sit down." "I don't need to sit down. I need you to answer the question." A pause. She looked at him the way she had looked at him since he was a child, assessing, calibrating. The negotiations with Douglas Ray began 14 months ago. The initial conversations were exploratory. Once it became clear there was mutual benefit, we moved into specifics. She paused. "The date has been confirmed. The venue deposit has been paid." He stared at her. He had known, coming down here, that the answer was going to be something like this. He had still, on some level, not been prepared for the flatness of it. 14 months, the Ray family's deposit paid. She was telling him this the way you'd tell someone about a quarterly financial arrangement. "You paid a deposit," he said. "On my wedding." "The Voss family paid a deposit on an alliance that will—" "Don't," he said. "Don't dress it up." She held his gaze. "The Del Corvo pressure isn't going away, Adrian. You know that. The Ray real estate connections give us 3 separate legitimate cover operations for the Northeast Corridor, and the Ray family name brings us into a tier of civic and political relationships that we have needed for 7 years. This is not sentiment. This is structural." "I understand the structural case," he said. "I've been running this organization for 8 years. I understand it perfectly." "Then you understand?" "What I don't understand," he said, and his voice had gone quiet the way it did when it mattered, is the part where you made this decision without me." She was quiet. 14 months, he said. 14 months of meetings I wasn't in. Conversations I wasn't told about. A date set, a venue confirmed, invitations printed. And at no point in 14 months did you think to have a conversation with your son about whether he wanted to be married. You would have said no. Yes, he said. I would have. That's not the answer you think it is. She lifted her chin slightly. You're in a relationship with a woman who has no standing in this world, who brings nothing to the table that helps us survive what is coming, who will be a liability when the Del Corvo situation escalates, because she is exposed and unprotected, and anyone who wants to reach you will reach through her. Her voice was even, controlled, not cruel. That was the hardest part, that she wasn't being cruel, she was being precise. I love you. I am doing what is necessary to protect you and this family. You decided Elena was a liability, he said. When? The assessment was ongoing. When? A pause. From the beginning. He stood in the silence of that and felt something he couldn't entirely name. Not anger exactly, though anger was there, more like the particular cold clarity that came when you stopped hoping a thing wasn't what you already knew it was. He had known, on some level, for a long time that his mother viewed Elena the way she viewed most variables in the organization, as something to be assessed and used or discarded based on utility. He had told himself that was her professional mode, and that privately she would come around. He had told himself that story for 2 years. She's not a variable, he said. Adrian, she's not a variable, he said again. She's a person, and she is the person I chose. You chose her when you had the luxury of choosing for yourself. That luxury is not a luxury, he said. It's not a luxury. It is a basic human. It's what I'm entitled to as a person, as your son. He stopped. He was starting to feel the heat of it in his chest, and he needed to keep this clean. He took a breath. You're going to call Douglas Ray today and tell him the arrangement is dissolved. She stared at him. You're going to tell him there was a miscommunication at the family level, and that the Voss family wishes the Rays well and will not be pursuing the connection at this time. He held her gaze. You'll lose the deposit, and you'll manage the embarrassment. That's the consequence. I'm not negotiating this. Victoria was quiet for a very long time. The tablet on her desk had gone dark. The tea at her elbow had stopped steaming. Outside the window behind her, the morning was gray and bright in equal measure, the way October mornings in New York sometimes were. If you do this, she said finally, and her voice had gone very even, you are making a decision you cannot unmake. The Ray family will not forget a public dissolution. Douglas Ray has connections that could... I'll deal with Douglas Ray, Adrian said. That's my job. And Elena Marcelli, what about her? She will not thank you for this, Victoria said. You think you're choosing her? She won't see it that way. She'll see a man who brought chaos into her life to prove a point to his mother. He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about Elena in her kitchen at 3 a.m, bare feet on the tile, telling him to decide based on what he actually wanted and not what he wanted to prove. He thought about the way she'd said, I need that to be the thing that drives it, with her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, the street beginning to wake up outside. That's my problem to manage, he said. Not yours. He picked up the invitation from her desk and he walked out. Behind him, he heard Victoria say his name once. Not a plea, not an order, just his name, in a tone he hadn't heard from her before. Something between grief and fury that hadn't quite decided which way to fall. He did not stop. By noon, the word had begun to move through the channels it always moved through in a world like theirs. Not social media, not phones, but the quieter networks of information that ran through restaurants and car services and certain law offices and the back rooms of establishments that did not advertise their back rooms. The Voss-Ray arrangement was collapsing. The Voss heir had rejected the match. There were versions being circulated that said Adrian had confronted his mother in a conference room. There were versions that said Elena Marcelli had delivered an ultimatum. There were versions somehow that already involved the Del Corvo family and what this meant for the balance of influence in the North Side. Adrian knew this because his operations director, a man named Carver, who had been with the organization for 16 years and had the metabolism of a man who ran on information and black coffee, delivered a situation summary at noon that included not just the factual status of ongoing business matters, but a brief note at the bottom. Social layer is already running interpretations. You'll want to get ahead of narrative if relevant. Adrian read the note and set the summary aside and called Elena. She picked up on the second ring. Lunchtime. She'd be at her desk at the firm where she worked, which was a mid-size architecture practice in Midtown that had no idea what her boyfriend did and which she had deliberately kept that way. "You talked to her," Elena said. Not a question. "I did." "And?" "I told her to dissolve it." A pause. "How did she take that?" "About how you'd expect." He heard the small sound she made. Not quite a sigh, more like the sound of someone putting down something heavy. "What happens with the Ray family?" "I'll manage it." "What does that mean specifically?" "It means I'll call Douglas Ray personally and have a conversation that costs me something and closes the door on this cleanly enough that it doesn't become a weapon." He paused. "It'll work. He's a businessman. Businessmen prefer clean breaks to ugly ones." "And your mother?" "She's going to be very angry for a very long time." "I know," Elena said. "I mean, what happens to her in the organization? Does this change her position?" He hadn't fully worked through that yet. "I don't know yet. Not immediately." Silence on her end. Then, "Adrian, I need to ask you something." "Yeah." "Did you do this because of me or because of what she did?" He had been waiting for this question. He had been forming the answer since he walked out of Victoria's office 4 hours ago. "Both," he said, "and I know that's not entirely what you wanted to hear." She was quiet. "You asked me to decide based on what I actually wanted," he said. "What I want is for the person I chose to not be treated as something that needs to be corrected. What I want is to run my own life. Those two things are not separate from each other." "That's a careful answer," she said. "It's an honest one." Another silence. Longer. He could hear the ambient sound of the office around her, keyboards, a distant phone, the baseline hum of a building full of people who didn't know she was having this conversation. "I haven't said thank you," she said finally. "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to," she said. "I'm saying it anyway. Thank you." He said nothing. There was nothing to say to that wouldn't sound like it was trying to be more than it was, so he let it sit. "I have to get back to work," she said. "I know. We should talk more tonight, not on the phone." "Yeah, I'll come to you." "Okay." Then right before she hung up, "Adrian?" "Yeah." "She's going to try something else," Elena said. "Whatever you think you closed today, she's not done. You know that, right?" He looked out the window of his office at the gray October light over the river. "I know," he said. She hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand and the city spread out below him, and thought about his mother's face when he'd said, "She's not a variable." The way something had tightened behind her eyes that wasn't hurt and wasn't anger, but was something more durable than either. The face of someone recalculating, revising. Elena was right. He had closed one door. Victoria had been building for 14 months. A woman who built for 14 months in silence did not stop because a door closed. The question was which door she was already building toward, and whether he would find out before or after she opened it. His phone rang. The screen read, "Ray, D." He answered. "Mr. Ray," he said. "I was about to call you. I think we need to talk." The voice on the other end was smooth, older, with the particular texture of a man who had spent decades knowing more than he revealed. "Yes," said Douglas Ray. "I suspect we do." And something in the way he said it, the cadence, the absence of surprise, the faint suggestion of preparation, made Adrian go very still. Because Douglas Ray didn't sound like a man who had just been told the deal was off. He sounded like a man who had been expecting this call and already knew how it was going to end. Douglas Ray did not speak like a man who was angry. That was the first thing Adrian registered. Not the words, but the texture underneath them, the particular smoothness of a voice that had already done its grieving and arrived somewhere colder on the other side. "I appreciate the call," Ray said. "Though I'll be honest with you, Adrian. May I call you Adrian? I was expecting it yesterday. Adrian stood at his office window, one hand in his pocket, his reflection faint in the glass. Then you already know what I'm going to say. I know what your mother told you, or rather, what she didn't tell you. A pause, weighted, deliberate. What I don't know is whether you've been told all of it yet. The room felt slightly colder. All of what? Perhaps we should meet in person, Ray said. Some conversations don't belong on a phone. I'm not interested in meetings that are designed to reopen something I'm closing. I understand that. The voice remained smooth, unhurried. But you should know, what your mother and I discussed went beyond the question of Isabella. There were other arrangements, financial ones, things that were already put in motion 4 months ago. Another pause. I'm not calling to fight you, son. I'm calling because you deserve to know what you're actually standing in the middle of. Adrian looked at his own reflection and said nothing for a long 3 seconds. I'll call you back, he said. Of course, said Douglas Ray. Take your time. The line went dead. Adrian set the phone face down on his desk and stood very still and felt the shape of what had just happened settling over him like a change in air pressure before a storm. Financial arrangements, already in motion. 4 months. That was specific. That was not a negotiating tactic. Men like Douglas Ray did not invoke specificity unless they had the documents to back it up. He picked the phone back up and called Carver. I need everything we have on Douglas Ray's business activity in the last 6 months, he said when Carver answered. Full transaction picture, any intersections with Voss accounts, any shared structures. I need it in 2 hours. Carver didn't ask why. He said, 2 hours, and hung up. Chat. The file arrived in 90 minutes because Carver was Carver. Adrian read it at his desk with the door closed and his coffee going cold beside him, and by the time he reached the 3rd page, he had stopped moving entirely. Not frozen, just the absolute stillness of a man whose mind is working very fast while his body has decided to get out of the way. Voss Capital, filtered through a shell company he recognized as a legacy structure his father had established in the 90s, had been quietly redirected over a series of transactions beginning in April. Not large amounts individually. Collectively, the number was significant. The receiving end was a real estate holding company registered in Delaware with a management address in Midtown, an address that, when Carver had cross-referenced it, matched a building that the Ray family's primary investment arm leased 2 floors of. Adrian closed the file. He opened it again. He looked at the dates. April was when Victoria had told him the Del Corvo pressure was becoming critical. April was when she had first raised obliquely the idea that the organization needed new alliances. He had not connected those 2 conversations at the time because he had not had reason to. He had not been looking. He should have been looking. He called his financial director, a woman named Priya, who had handled the Voss accounts for 6 years and who picked up sounding like she was already bracing. I've been waiting for your call, she said. You knew about the transfers. I flagged them internally in May, she said. I was told by Victoria's office that they were authorized under a legacy operational directive and that you had been informed. I followed up twice. Both times I received the same answer. A pause. I should have come to you directly. I know that. Yes, he said. You should have. He kept his voice level because losing it at Priya wouldn't change what the numbers said. I need a full audit. Everything that touched that shell structure in the last 18 months. I need it clean and I need it fast. I can have a preliminary picture by end of day. Do that. He hung up. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling, which was smooth and white, and offered nothing. His mother had not just arranged a marriage without his knowledge. She had moved money. She had created financial ties to the Ray family that existed independently of any wedding, ties that were already established and would not simply dissolve because he had walked out of her office this morning. The marriage had been the visible piece, the thing designed to be seen, and perhaps even the thing designed to be rejected, because a rejected marriage was a clean break, while the financial architecture beneath it quietly persisted. He did not yet know if that interpretation was correct. It might be too elaborate. Victoria was strategic, but she was also, at her core, someone who believed in the direct application of pressure. He needed more information before he decided what shape this was. But the feeling in his chest right now, the slow, cold settling of it, was not the feeling of a man who thought he was wrong. It was Kiss. He found Victoria on the 14th floor at 4 in the afternoon. She was in a meeting with two men he recognized as outside legal counsel, which she ended immediately when she saw his face at the glass. The two lawyers gathered their things with the practiced efficiency of people who had learned to read rooms quickly, and they were gone in under a minute. Victoria stood behind her desk. She did not sit. Neither did Adrian. "The Ray transfers," he said. "How much is in play?" She held his gaze. No flinch. No pretense of not understanding the question. "Enough to establish a working relationship. That's not a number." 11 million, spread across 4 transactions. The number landed in the room. Adrian absorbed it without changing his expression because his expression was already doing the minimum required. And the structure on the Ray end? A holding company, clean. It's been used for legitimate real estate activity for 4 years, which provides cover, he said. "I know what it provides. That's not what I'm asking." He moved closer to the desk. "I'm asking whether you designed this so that dissolving the marriage doesn't dissolve the financial connection." A pause. She looked at him the way she sometimes had when he was young and had caught her in something she hadn't expected him to find. Not guilt, exactly, because Victoria did not operate in guilt, but the recalibration of a woman who had underestimated the person in front of her. "The financial relationship exists independently," she said. "That was by design. Because arrangements based solely on personal alliances are fragile. Building a structural connection that survives personal changes is—" "That's enough," he said. She stopped. "You built it to survive me," he said. "You built it so that when I said no to the marriage, and you knew I would say no eventually, you've always known I would eventually find the limit of what I'd accept. The financial piece would already be in place, and I would be standing in the middle of a relationship with Douglas Ray, whether I wanted it or not." He looked at her. "That's what you did." She did not confirm it. She also did not deny it. She stood with her hands flat on the desk and looked at him with those sharp, dark eyes and said quietly, "I have been keeping this family alive since before you knew what the family was. I held it together when your father was dying, and the Mortara people were circling, and every man in our structure was deciding whether to stay or find a safer place to land. I did that. Me. And I did it by making decisions that needed to be made before the moment arrived when they had to be made. That is how you survive in this world. By deceiving your son." "By protecting my son," she said, and there was something in it now. Not defensiveness, but a real, raw thing. Something that believed itself, that had always believed itself. "You think I don't see what you're doing with that woman. You think I don't understand why she appeals to you. She's simple, Adrian. She's clean and quiet, and she doesn't ask you to be anything, and after everything you carry, that feels like relief. I understand that, but she cannot protect you. She cannot stand beside you in the world that we actually live in. She will be used against you, and when that happens, she will not survive it, and neither, possibly, will you." The word simple sat in the air between them. "Don't," he said. "It's the truth." "It is not the truth. It is your assessment of a person you have never made any effort to know." His voice was still level. He needed it to stay level. "And it is a justification you have built to make a decision that was not yours to make feel like it was made for the right reasons." "Adrian, how much does Ray know about our operations?" The shift in subject hit her. She steadied. "A working picture. Enough to make the partnership functional. Enough to be a problem if the relationship deteriorates." She said nothing. "How much, Victoria?" "He knows about the Northeast Corridor structure," she said. "In general terms." "General terms?" He looked at her. "What else?" "The Callaway arrangement." The Callaway arrangement was a financing mechanism that Adrian had been managing for 2 years, delicately, because 3 of the people connected to it had government adjacency, and exposure was not an abstract risk. He looked at his mother and felt something that was almost admiration, in the terrible way that the most precise mistakes could inspire something like awe. "You told Douglas Ray about Callaway," he said. "In confidence. as part of establishing good faith. As collateral, he said. You gave him collateral. She didn't answer. The silence was its own answer. He turned away from her and walked to the window because he needed something to look at that was not her face. The city was doing its late afternoon thing, the light going amber, the traffic thickening, the Hudson catching color. He stood there for a moment and let his breathing settle. She had given Douglas Ray leverage, not accidentally, not incidentally, as a design feature. A man who held information about Calloway held a piece of the Voss organization in a way that didn't require a wedding, a handshake, or a signed agreement. It was the most complete trap Adrian had ever walked into, and the person who had laid it was the person who had taught him how to recognize traps. I need you to leave the office, he said. He did not turn around. Not today, but within the month. The silence behind him stretched. This is my building, she said finally. The voice was steady, but something was straining underneath it. It's the family's building. I run the family. He turned around. You will have everything you need. I'm not cutting you out of the financial support, and I am not removing your name from anything. But you cannot work out of this building while I am trying to manage what you have created. Do you understand me? She looked at him for a long time. Her face was doing something he had not seen it do in a very long time, maybe ever, or maybe only in the months after his father died when she had thought no one was watching. It was the face of a woman who had been so certain of her own rightness for so long that the first serious contact with the possibility of being wrong was hitting her somewhere genuinely unprepared. I did this for you, she said. I know you believe that, he said. And he did. He did believe she believed it. That's the part that doesn't change anything. He walked out. He drove to Brooklyn again, but this time it was not 3 in the morning and Elena was not in her kitchen. She was sitting on the front steps of her building when he arrived, which meant she had seen his car from the window and come down, which meant something had already reached her. She was wearing her work clothes still. Dark trousers, a pale blouse, her hair up the way she kept it during the day. She had her arms crossed over her chest, not defensive, more like she was holding herself steady, and when he got out of the car, she looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before. Not afraid, not angry. Something more controlled and more disturbing than either. He sat down on the steps beside her. The street was doing its early evening thing. Kids on the block, someone's music from an upstairs window, the smell of something cooking from the building next door. Tell me, she said. He told her. All of it. Ray's call, the transfers, the shell company, Calloway. He told her in the same order he had learned it, without softening the structure of it, because she had always been able to handle the actual shape of a thing, and he was not going to start managing what she received now. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she looked at the sidewalk for a while. She built a financial trap, Elena said. Yes. So even if you close the marriage, Ray has leverage. Yes. And Ray knows about something sensitive enough that you can't simply tell him the relationship is over and walk away. That's the situation. She turned and looked at him. There was something working in her eyes, not hurt this time, not the controlled acknowledgement of earlier, something harder. When were you going to tell me about Calloway? He held her gaze. It's an ongoing situation. I'm not asking for a briefing, she said. I'm asking why I'm hearing the name for the first time right now from you, on these steps, as part of a story about your mother using it as collateral for a deal that was about getting rid of me. The street continued around them. Someone's kid went past on a bicycle. The music from upstairs shifted to something slower. Because I have always kept certain things separate, he said, between what I do and what we have. I know you have, she said. I've let you do that. I've been okay with not knowing certain things because I decided to trust that you were handling them and that the separation was protecting me. She paused. But the separation just became a way for your mother to move against me without me having any way to see it coming. So I need you to tell me something honestly. Okay. How exposed am I? Elena said. Right now, as it stands. He wanted to tell her she wasn't. He wanted to give her the answer that would make the look on her face resolve into something steadier. He looked at her, the set of her jaw, the careful stillness of her hands, The way she was asking the question like a person who already knew part of the answer and was trying to find out if she was right. "More than you should be," he said. She nodded, slowly, once, like the answer had landed somewhere she'd already prepared for it to land. She turned back to the street and was quiet for long enough that the light shifted, the amber going toward gray. "Elena?" "I need a minute," she said. Not sharp, just true. He gave her the minute. He sat beside her on the steps and looked at the same street and didn't say anything, which was one of the few things he was genuinely good at, being still next to someone without demanding that the stillness be filled. When she finally moved, it was to stand up. She brushed the back of her trousers with her hands and looked down at him. "Come inside," she said. "You need to eat something, and so do I, and we can't figure this out on the front steps." He stood. She turned toward the door, and he followed, and he noticed the way she held the door. Not for him, just open long enough that he could catch it, which was such a specific Elena thing that it hit him somewhere small and exact, the way small things sometimes did. Inside in the elevator, she said without looking at him, "I meant what I said this morning about deciding based on what you actually want. That hasn't changed." "I know. But I need to know," she said, "that if I stay in this, if I keep choosing to be here, that you're not going to keep managing what I know to protect me. Because your mother just showed me what happens when I'm in the dark." The elevator stopped. The doors opened. She looked at him. "I'm not her. I can handle the real thing, but I need you to believe that." He looked at her in the flat light of the elevator landing. He thought about the steps, the financial transfers, Calloway, his mother's face, and the sound of Douglas Ray's voice saying, "I think we need to talk like a man holding a hand of cards he'd been dealt 14 months ago. "I believe it," he said. She held his gaze for a moment, searching it the way she rarely did. She was usually willing to take him at his word, which was both the gift and the weight of it. Then she turned and went to her door. He followed her inside. She went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator and stood in its light for a moment and then said mostly to herself, "I have eggs, and I have leftover rice, and I have about 4 things that might be vegetables." "That's fine," he said. "I know it's fine. I wasn't asking for your approval." She pulled things out. He sat at the kitchen table. The apartment was quiet in the way apartments are quiet when the city outside is starting to pick up speed again, the particular counter-rhythm of interior stillness against exterior noise. She cracked eggs into a pan, and the smell of it, the immediate ordinary warmth of food being made, loosened something in his chest that had been tight since 2 a.m. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and went very still. The message was from a number he didn't recognize, but the content of it was specific enough that it could only have come from one direction. "Mr. Voss, I think you should know your mother had a second meeting with Douglas Ray this afternoon, after your conversation with her. Just the 2 of them, no lawyers." He stared at the message. Elena had her back to him, moving the pan. The eggs were sizzling. The street outside was doing its evening thing, after your conversation with her, which meant after he had told her to leave the building, after he had laid out what he knew and told her the financial arrangement needed to be unwound. After he had walked out believing the conversation had reached some kind of resolution, Victoria Voss had picked up her phone and called Douglas Ray. He set his own phone face down on the table with a deliberateness that kept his hand from doing something harder with it. "You okay?" Elena said from the stove without turning around. "Yeah," he said. She turned. She looked at him. He was not apparently as controlled as he thought he was, because she turned the burner down and crossed to the table and looked at the phone face down and then looked at his face. "What happened?" she said. He flipped the phone over and showed her the message. She read it. He watched her read it. The small change in her breathing, the slight press of her lips together, the way her eyes came up from the screen and met his with an expression that was beyond anger, past hurt, in the specific territory of someone who has been told, finally and without ambiguity, exactly what she is dealing with. "She went back to him," Elena said. "After everything you said to her this morning, she went straight back to him." "Yes." "So she's not going to stop." "No," he said. "She's not." Elena set the phone down between them. She looked at it for a moment like it was a thing with weight. Then she looked up at him, and what was in her face now was something he had never seen there before. Not fear, not desperation, but the clear-eyed, undeceived recognition of someone who has just understood that the situation is not what they thought it was and will not resolve the way they'd hoped. "Then I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear it." "Okay." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down and put her hands flat on the table, and he recognized the posture. It was the posture of someone about to say a thing that cost them something. "I can't do this if it's a war," she said. "I don't mean us. I mean this situation. Your mother and Ray and the money and whatever is coming next." She held his gaze. "I'm not built for it. I'm not asking you to be different than you are or to leave what you've built. But I cannot be the person standing in the middle of a fight between you and your mother and Douglas Ray and whoever else gets involved, because I will lose. Not because I'm weak, because I don't have the tools for this world, and I have always known that, and I stayed anyway because you made me feel like it was possible to be on the edge of it without being inside it." She paused. "But I'm inside it now, and the question is whether that changes what we are." The eggs were still on the stove. He could smell them going past the point of good. He stood up and turned the burner off. He stood with his back to her for a moment, looking at the pan, the ordinary wreckage of a dinner that had gotten away from them. She didn't say anything. She waited. He turned around. He looked at her at the table with her hands flat and her expression open and exhausted and precise, and he said, "I'm going to need a few days to manage the Ray situation. What that looks like on the other side. Don't plan around me," she said quietly. "I mean it. Don't make me a variable in your calculation. I need to know what you're going to do because it's what you're going to do, not because of me." He looked at her for a long time. "And if what I'm going to do takes me deeper into this," she held his gaze, "then I need to know that too." He nodded. He came back to the table and sat down, and they looked at each other in the kitchen light, the burnt eggs between them and the city outside pressing in from all sides. And he thought about what Elena had said on the front steps. "I can handle the real thing." And he thought about the message on his phone. And he thought about his mother at 4 p.m. picking up the phone to call Douglas Ray. She had made her move. He had told her the terms, and she had heard them and made her move anyway, which meant she had decided that the cost of defying him was lower than the cost of what he was asking her to give up. That told him something. Not about her love for him. He didn't doubt her love. It told him about the thing underneath the love, the thing that had been running her decisions for 14 months before this, the thing that said the organization, the name, the legacy, the survival of what his father had built was not negotiable, even when her son asked her to negotiate. He would deal with Douglas Ray. He would audit the Callaway exposure and build a wall around it. He would do everything that needed doing in the next 72 hours to stabilize the situation. But something had changed in the last 10 minutes that had not changed this morning when he'd walked out of Victoria's office believing he had the upper hand. His mother had just told him, without words, that she was not finished. And somewhere in the back of his mind, quiet and precise, like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known was there, he was beginning to understand that Elena walking away from this, not from him, but from the situation, might not be a choice she got to make anymore. He gave her 72 hours. That was what he'd told himself in the kitchen, standing over the burnt eggs with the city pressing in from outside. 72 hours to manage the Ray situation, build a wall around Callaway, and find out who had sent that message and what they wanted for it. He did not get 72 hours. He got 18. Carver called at 6:43 in the morning, which was how Adrian knew before he even answered that something had broken overnight. Carver was a man who sent emails before 7. He did not call. "There's something you need to see," Carver said. "Not on the phone." "My office, 30 minutes. He was already dressed. He had slept 3 hours on the couch in his penthouse, which was not the same as sleeping, but was sufficient. And he had been awake since 5 going through the preliminary audit Priya had sent the night before. The numbers were worse than the first pass had suggested. Not catastrophically, but in the specific way that careful, layered concealment looked when you finally got the light on it. 11 million was the confirmed figure, but the structure beneath it suggested additional exposure through 2 secondary entities that would take another week to fully trace. He was in the elevator when his phone showed a news alert. He looked at it. He read it twice. He stood in the elevator as the floors descended and felt the bottom drop out of something he hadn't even known he'd been standing on. The alert was from a financial news aggregator, the kind that picked up filings and regulatory notices before most outlets caught them. The headline read, Voss Group subsidiary flagged in Callaway Capital Inquiry, SEC preliminary review underway. He read it a third time. The elevator reached the lobby. The Callaway inquiry was not supposed to exist yet. It was supposed to be a contained internal review, nothing external, nothing public, nothing that touched the regulatory surface for at least another 6 months, while his lawyers managed the exposure window. He had had a conversation about this specific timeline 3 weeks ago with 2 attorneys whose entire function was to ensure that timeline held. Someone had moved the clock. Carver was already in the conference room on the 38th floor when Adrian arrived, along with Priya and a man named Stern who handled regulatory liaison, a thin, careful man in his 50s who had the permanent look of someone solving a problem that had no good solution, which was, in fact, his entire professional experience. The 3 of them looked at Adrian when he walked in the way people look at someone they've been waiting for and are slightly afraid of and need to tell something terrible. "Tell me what happened," Adrian said. He sat down. He did not take off his jacket. Stern spoke first because it was his territory. The SEC notice went public at 5:18 this morning. It's a preliminary inquiry designation, which is early stage. It doesn't indicate a formal investigation yet. But the designation itself is significant because it creates a public record and starts a clock. He paused. The inquiry was triggered by an anonymous filing. The filing referenced the Callaway structure in specific enough terms that whoever submitted it had internal knowledge. Adrian looked at him. "How internal?" Stern looked at his hands. The filing referenced 2 transaction dates and a routing sequence that was not in any public record. It referenced the identity of a specific counterparty who had been kept entirely off documentation. Another pause. The level of specificity suggests someone with direct access to our internal accounting or our legal correspondence. The room was very quiet. Or, Carver said carefully, someone who was told those specifics in the context of a good faith disclosure. The sentence landed. No one moved. Adrian looked at Carver, who held his gaze steadily, which was what Carver did when he was delivering something he knew would land hard and had decided not to cushion it. Douglas Ray. Victoria had told Douglas Ray about Callaway 4 months ago as an act of good faith. The specifics she would have shared, transaction dates, routing, the counterparty, matched precisely what Stern had just described was in the anonymous filing. "When did the filing go in?" Adrian said. Stern checked his notes. Time-stamped at 11:47 p.m. last night. Last night. After Victoria's second meeting with Ray. After Elena had shown Adrian the message on his phone. After everything that had happened in that kitchen, Ray had gone home and made a decision about the Callaway filing within hours of learning that Adrian was going to dissolve the arrangement. This was not a warning shot. Warning shots were imprecise, designed to create anxiety and prompt negotiation. This was surgical. This was a man who had been given a weapon, had kept it carefully, and had deployed it at the exact moment it would cause maximum structural damage before Adrian could build any defense. "He used her," Adrian said. The words came out quiet and very flat. "She gave him everything he needed, and he waited for the right moment, and he used it." No one in the room responded to that directly. Priya looked at the table. Stern looked at his notes. Carver looked at Adrian. "What do you need from us right now?" Carver said. "Get the attorneys on the phone. All of them. I need to know our exposure window from the moment the preliminary designation became public, and I need to know what the filing's existence does to the 6-month timeline we had." He looked at Stern. "I need to know if we can challenge the anonymous submission process." "We can look at it," Stern said carefully. "Anonymous filings are legitimate mechanisms. Challenging one is, it draws attention." "Everything draws attention now," Adrian said. "The designation is already public. The attention is already there." He stood up. "Find me options. Not comfort. Options." He walked out of the conference room and into the corridor and kept walking until he reached the end of it, where there was a window that looked north toward the park, and he stood there with one hand against the glass and looked at the city and let himself have 30 seconds of something he rarely permitted himself. The raw, unmanaged version of what he was feeling, with no one watching and nothing to maintain. Douglas Ray had handed the SEC a loaded filing using information Victoria had given him as a gesture of trust, which meant one of two things. Either Ray had planned this from the beginning, had accepted Victoria's overture specifically to gain access to Voss' vulnerabilities, and the marriage proposal had never been anything other than a vehicle for that access, or Ray had been a legitimate partner until Adrian had tried to walk away, at which point he'd decided that a scorched earth response was more valuable than a graceful exit. Both possibilities were bad. The first was worse. He pressed his forehead briefly against the cool glass and then straightened and went to find out which one it was. The answer came from an unexpected direction. He had been back in his office for an hour, working through the legal team's preliminary response framework when his direct line rang. Well, not his cell, the office line, which had a number known to approximately 12 people. He looked at the display. The number was one he didn't recognize, but the area code was Connecticut. He picked up. "Voss?" The voice on the other end was a woman's, young or youngish, controlled with the specific crispness of someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say. "Mr. Voss, you don't know me. My name is Claire Ray. Douglas Ray is my father." He was quiet for a moment, then, "How did you get this number?" "My father keeps records of every number associated with people he does business with. I went through his files this morning." A pause. "I need you to know that I didn't know about the SEC filing until I saw the news alert, same as you. I want to be clear about that." "Why are you calling me?" "Because what my father did is wrong, and I'm not able to sit here and pretend otherwise." The voice was still controlled, but something was straining at the edges of it. "He's been planning this since the beginning. The arrangement with your mother," he approached her, not the other way around. He identified the Voss organization as a target 18 months ago, and he found a way in through your mother. And he has been building this specifically to acquire leverage that he could use if the relationship ever became inconvenient. Adrian's hand tightened on the phone by a fraction. "You're telling me your father went to my mother?" He identified that she had concerns about your personal situation. He found a way to make himself useful to her. He used her the way he uses everyone. The voice was doing something now that was not quite grief and not quite anger, a version of both, cold and specific. He told her Isabella would be good for you and for the family, and he was very convincing, and she wanted to believe him because she already wanted the outcome he was describing. The picture rearranged itself, not entirely. Victoria had still made her own choices, had still moved money without Adrian's knowledge, had still decided that her judgment superseded his. None of that changed. But the origin point was different. Douglas Ray had not been a passive recipient of Victoria's overture. He had been the architect of it. "Why are you doing this?" Adrian said. A silence. Then, "Because I'm done," Claire Ray said. "I've been watching my father operate my entire life, and I have covered for him, and I have looked the other way, and I am finished with it. What he did last night, the filing, that was the last thing." Another pause, and in it something personal that she was working to keep out of her voice and not entirely succeeding. Also because Isabella doesn't know any of this. She thought the arrangement was genuine. She thought your families had come together honestly. She's going to find out today what her father actually did, and I wanted someone on the other side to know the truth before that conversation happens. He looked at his desk, the audit papers, the preliminary legal response, the cold coffee. "Is there documentation? Anything that shows the approach came from your father's side?" "There are emails," she said, "between my father and a man named Hecht, who he uses for preliminary research and outreach. They go back 22 months. I can send them." "Do that." He gave her a secure email address. She said she would send them within the hour. Then she said, "Mr. Voss, what my father did to your organization is serious, but what he did to your mother, convincing her that this was all her idea, that she was protecting her son, that's the part I think you should know." A pause. "She genuinely believed it. He's very good at making people believe what he needs them to believe." The line went quiet. "Thank you for calling," he said, and meant it more specifically than the words could hold. He hung up. He sat back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling and let the new picture assemble itself over the old one, the way you held two transparencies against the light and watched them resolve into a single image. His mother had been wrong. She had made decisions that were not hers to make, and had moved money without his knowledge, and had acted with a certainty about her own rightness that had caused damage he was still measuring. All of that was true and remained true. But she had not been operating from malice or from a secret ambition that ran counter to his interests. She had been operating from the particular blind spot of a woman who loved her son so completely that she could not see when someone was using that love as a door. Douglas Ray had walked through that door 22 months ago with a soft knock and a reasonable face, and Victoria Voss had let him in. So, he called his mother at 9:40. She picked up on the first ring, which meant she had been waiting. "I know about Claire Ray's call," Victoria said before he could speak. Her voice was different than it had been yesterday. Not softer exactly, but stripped of the particular armor of certainty. "Douglas told me she'd been in his files. I imagine she reached you." "She did." A silence. Then, "How much did she tell you?" "Enough." He paused. "He came to you 22 months ago. He found the opening and he walked through it." The silence on her end was a different quality than the silences from yesterday. "Yes," she said. "You didn't know." "I thought—" She stopped. He heard her breath, the slight unsteadiness of it, which was something he had not heard from her in years. "He made it feel like my idea. He listened well. He asked about the organization's challenges, and he listened, and then he started suggesting connections, possibilities. It felt like it emerged naturally from our conversations." A pause. "I know how that sounds." "It sounds like someone who is very good at what he does found someone who was already worried and already looking for solutions," Adrian said, "and gave her exactly the solution she was already half convinced she needed." Another silence. Longer. "The filing," she said. "Calloway, that's my fault." "Yes." "I gave him everything he needed for it." "Yes." "Adrian." Her voice had gone to something he had not heard since the months after his father died. Not weak, his mother did not do weak, but genuinely exposed. A real thing in it. "I believed I was protecting you. I need you to know that was real, even if everything I did from it was wrong." "I know," he said. And he did. He had known since Claire Ray had said she genuinely believed it. "That doesn't fix the Calloway exposure." "No," she said. "It doesn't. And it doesn't fix what you did to Elena." A very long silence. "No," she said again, quieter. "I need to deal with Ray today. I need you to stay completely out of any further contact with him or his people. Nothing. No calls, no messages, no communication through intermediaries. Can you do that?" "Yes." "And I need the names of every person in our structure who knew about the transfers. Every name. Priya has some of them, but I need the complete list." "I'll have Robert send it within the hour." "Okay." He paused. Then, because it was true and because she needed to hear it, even though saying it would cost him something he wasn't sure he had right now. "I don't think you're a bad person. I think you made decisions that were not yours to make, and that a man who is very good at his work found the exact place where your love for me and your fear for this family overlapped, and he put a lever there and used it." He stopped. "We're going to deal with what that created, but I need you to understand that when this is over, things between us are going to look different, not broken, different." He heard her breathing. Steady now, or steadier. The particular steadiness of someone choosing it deliberately. "I understand," she said. The emails from Claire arrived at 10:15. He read them with Stern and his lead attorney, a woman named Park, who had represented the Voss organization for 9 years, and who read the chain with the focused expression of someone doing rapid damage assessment. The chain was thorough. 22 months of Ray's communications with his researcher Hecht, the initial identification of the Voss organization as a target, the mapping of the family structure, the specific notation that Victoria Voss was the access point because she had apparent concerns about succession and personal risk factors around her son's current relationship. The word current had been underlined in Hecht's summary, which meant it had been flagged as a vulnerability. It had been flagged 2 years ago, before Adrian had any reason to think anyone outside the family even knew Elena's name. This gives us standing to challenge the filing, Park said. If Ray provided information to the SEC that was obtained through a scheme to defraud, through a manufactured relationship specifically designed to extract proprietary information, we can argue the filing itself is tainted. She paused. It doesn't make the filing disappear, but it reframes the entire inquiry as something Ray created, not something we exposed. How long does that process take? Adrian said. Months. Possibly longer. And in the meantime, the designation is public, and every one of our banking relationships is going to be asking questions. Yes, Park said. In the meantime, that's the reality. He looked at the emails on the table. Hecht summary with its underlined notation. Current relationship. Elena's name had not appeared anywhere in the chain, but she was there, in the gap between the words, in the thing Ray had identified and decided was useful. He stood up. I need an hour, he said to the room. Keep working. I'll be back. He called Elena from the car. She picked up on the second ring, and he could hear from the ambient sound that she was outside. Street noise. Wind. I'm on lunch, she said. What's happening? He told her about the SEC filing, about Claire Ray, about the emails and what they showed, that Ray had identified her existence, her relationship with Adrian, as the primary lever 22 months ago. The street noise continued around her while he talked. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. He targeted me, she said. Specifically. Your existence as a vulnerability, yes. He didn't target you personally. You were a data point. That's a distinction that doesn't feel very meaningful right now. I know. She was quiet again. He heard her move, footsteps, the sound of her finding somewhere to stand still. Adrian, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely straight with me. Okay. Is it going to get worse before it gets better? He thought about the Callaway exposure and the months of regulatory process and the banking relationships and Ray's remaining leverage and what it would take to fully neutralize a man who had been building this particular structure for almost 2 years. He thought about what Honest looked like right now, standing in a car on a midtown street with the city going about its oblivious business outside the window. Yes, he said, it's going to get worse. She exhaled. Not a sigh. Just breath, controlled and deliberate. How much worse? I don't fully know yet. I'm still mapping it. Another silence. When she spoke again, her voice had the quality he recognized from the front steps. The contained, precise sound of someone who has just made a decision they're not going to walk back. I need you to come to me tonight, she said. Not to plan, not to strategize. I just need you to come and be a person for a few hours. Not a man running a crisis. Can you do that? Yes, he said. Okay. A pause. And Adrian. Yeah. The woman your mother was trying to replace me with, Isabella. She didn't know. No, she didn't. Someone should tell her that what happened to her wasn't fair either. He looked out the window at the street. It was an Elena thing to say. To hold the accounting open wide enough to include someone she had never met who had been used as a piece in a game she hadn't consented to. It was the kind of thing that reminded him, with a precision that was almost physical, exactly why Douglas Ray's assessment of her as merely a vulnerability had been the most spectacular misread of the entire operation. I'll make sure she knows, he said. He meant to say something else. He wasn't sure what. Something that held more weight than the logistics of the day, something that acknowledged what they were both standing in. But before he could find the words, his phone buzzed against his ear, the notification vibration that meant a call coming in on the other line, and he looked at the screen. It was Carver, and Carver's second call in one day meant something had broken again. I have to take this, he said to Elena. I'll be there tonight. Okay, she said, and the line went to silence. He switched to Carver. What? We have a problem at the Carroll Gardens apartment, Carver said. His voice was doing the thing it did when he was managing his own alarm. Very even, very specific, no extra words. 2 men were outside Elena's building this morning between 6 and 7. Building security has them on camera. They weren't doing anything visible, but they were there for 53 minutes, and one of them made a call from directly outside her front entrance. Adrian went completely still. They match a physical description on file, Carver said, for two individuals connected to the Del Corvo operation out of the Bronx. The Del Corvo family. The Bronx. The pressure Victoria had been citing for months as the reason the organization needed new alliances, new strength, new structural protection. The pressure Adrian had been managing and monitoring, the same pressure that Douglas Ray had used as a selling point when he'd walked through Victoria's door 22 months ago. They were watching her building, Adrian said. Yes. How long have they been watching? I don't know, Carver said. This is the first we've picked up. But if they're there at 6 in the morning, they've likely been there before. We just didn't have eyes on that location. The world rearranged itself again. Not slowly this time, all at once, the way a structure shifts in the moment before it falls, everything moving at the same time in the same direction. The Del Corvo family knew about Elena. They had identified the same vulnerability Douglas Ray had identified, perhaps from different intelligence, perhaps from Ray's own network. He didn't know yet. And they had been watching her building before 6 in the morning on the day after the SEC filing went public, which was either coincidence or coordination, and Adrian Voss had not survived 38 years in this world by believing in coincidence. I need 2 people on her immediately, he said. Not visible. Tell them to stay back, but don't lose her. He was already moving, reaching for the door. And get me everything on the Del Corvo connection to Ray. Everything. Whatever exists, I need it in the next hour. Already pulling it, Carver said. He disconnected and sat for exactly 3 seconds, looking at his phone and at the street outside and at the place in his chest where something cold and absolute had settled. Not panic, he didn't panic, but the recognition that arrived when a situation passed through the last checkpoint between manageable and something else entirely. Elena was on her lunch break, standing on a midtown street, alone, without security, in a city where 2 men connected to the Del Corvo operation had been outside her front door 4 hours ago. She had said, I can handle the real thing. She had said it sitting at her kitchen table with her hands flat and her voice steady, and he had believed her, had needed to believe her, had let that belief be one of the foundations he was standing on. But the real thing, the actual texture of what was now converging on her ordinary life from 3 separate directions simultaneously, was not something she had ever been built to handle, and the distance between what she could handle and what was coming for her was... He called Elena back while he was moving through the midtown street, shoulder-cutting through the lunch crowd, phone against his ear. She picked up on the first ring this time. Where are you right now? He said. Exactly. The tone of it stopped her. He heard the small intake. 47th and 6th, outside the deli near the office. Why? Stay where you are. Don't go back inside the building yet. Just stay on the street where there are people around you. Adrian, there were 2 men outside your apartment this morning. He kept his voice low and level because the street was full of people, and because losing control of his voice right now would not help either of them. They're connected to the Del Corvo operation. I have people coming to you right now. I need you to stay visible and stay on this call until they arrive. The silence on her end lasted exactly 2 seconds. He knew her well enough to know what those 2 seconds were. Not panic, she didn't panic, but the hard, fast recalibration of a person absorbing information that changes the physical landscape of where they're standing. Okay, she said, you're okay. You're in public. Nothing is going to happen on 47th Street at noon. I know, she said. And she did know. Her voice was steady, the specific steadiness of someone who has decided to be useful to the situation rather than a problem inside it. I'm standing in front of the deli. There are about 30 people on this block. Good. Keep talking to me. What does this mean? She said. Not a frightened question, a practical one. It means the Del Corvo people have been watching you, probably longer than this morning. It means this is more connected than I understood. The Ray situation, the SEC filing, the pressure on the organization. It's been coordinated. Coordinated how? I don't have the full picture yet. I'm building it. He turned a corner, moved faster. Elena, I need to move you. Not Carroll Gardens, somewhere I can put security around. A pause. For how long? I don't know yet. Another pause, longer. He could hear the street around her, the same city, blocks away, indifferent. You're telling me I can't go home? Not tonight, possibly not for a few days. He heard her breathe. He heard her work through it, the way she worked through things. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the sound of a mind making contact with a fact it doesn't want, and accepting it anyway. Okay, she said. Tell me where. I have a place in Tribeca. Clean. It's not connected to anything the Del Corvo people would know about. I'm sending 2 people to you right now. Marcus and a woman named Dee, who has worked personal security for 7 years. They'll be with you inside of 8 minutes. How will I know it's them? Marcus is 6'2", shaved head, gray jacket. He'll say your name and show you a blue card with a 4-digit number. The number is 4417. Don't go with anyone who doesn't have that number. 4417, she repeated. Flat, precise. Filing it. Yes. And you, she said. Where are you? I'm coming. I have 2 things I need to do first, and then I'm coming directly to you. A small silence. Be careful, she said, and the 2 words were so plain and so specifically hers, not theatrical, not pressured, just the honest thing she felt, said without decoration, that something in his chest pulled tight in a way that had nothing to do with the operational situation and everything to do with the fact that this woman had been standing in an ordinary city on an ordinary lunch break when this morning had decided to land on her. I will, he said. 8 minutes. He hung up and called Marcus and gave him Elena's location and the card protocol and told him 8 minutes was not a suggestion. Marcus said 5. Adrian said good. The first thing he needed to do was Carver. He found him in the operations room on the 38th floor, which was not a dramatic space. No screens covering walls, no tactical displays, just a large room with good lighting and 8 people who knew how to do their jobs, and Carver standing at a table with printed documents and a tablet, and the expression of a man who had not stopped moving since 6 that morning. Del Corvo Ray connection, Adrian said as he walked in. Carver slid a single printed sheet across the table. 1 degree of separation. Marcus Del Corvo, not the head of the family, his younger brother, sits on the board of a commercial property company registered in New Jersey. That company has a silent investment partner. The partner is a Delaware LLC. The LLC's registered agent is the same firm that handles 2 of Ray's secondary holding companies. Adrian looked at the sheet. That's the connection. That's the documented connection. There may be more. This took 40 minutes to find. Given more time. We don't have more time. He set the sheet down. They coordinated. Ray moves the SEC filing, and the Del Corvo people put eyes on Elena the same morning. That's not coincidence, and it's not independent. Agreed. Which means one of 2 things. Either Ray and the Del Corvo family have been running this together from the start, in which case what Victoria walked into was bigger than one man with an agenda, or Ray made contact with the Del Corvo people after I tried to dissolve the arrangement, and they found common ground quickly. He looked at Carver. Which reads more accurate to you? Carver considered it for 3 seconds, which was how long Carver took when he was actually thinking rather than just responding. The second, the Delaware LLC connection is recent. The registration date on the Del Corvo Company's amendment listing that agent is 9 months ago. If this was a coordinated plan from the beginning, you'd expect the structural connection to be older. So Ray went to the Del Corvo people when the deal started falling apart. That's my read. He had leverage through Callaway, and he needed muscle behind it. The Del Corvo family has been looking for a way into the Voss organization's territory for 3 years. Ray offered them an entry point. Adrian looked at the table. The pieces of it were assembling with the particular ugly clarity of something that had been moving toward this configuration for a long time and was only now visible in full. How many people does Del Corvo have active in the city right now, he said. We're estimating 14 to 18 in their New York operation. Of those, 6 to 8 are what I'd call action-capable. Carver paused. The 2 outside Elena's building this morning, I don't think that was threat delivery. I think that was information gathering. They wanted to know her routine, her schedule. They were building a picture. Yes, which means they haven't decided what to do with her yet. They're still in the assessment phase. That was something. Not much, but something. A window that existed because they were still in the planning stage rather than the execution stage. Windows closed. He needed to move while this one was still open. I want a meeting with Marco del Corvo, he said. Carver looked at him. The head of the family? Yes. Not the brother. Not the brother, Marco. He looked back at Carver steadily. Today. Carver absorbed that without visibly reacting, which was itself a reaction because Carver was a man who processed things through his body, and right now his body was very still. Requesting a direct meeting with Marco del Corvo on the same day his people had eyes on your partner's apartment is going to be read as either very strong or very desperate. I know. Which are you going for? I'm going for fast, Adrian said. Make the call. On. The second thing was Douglas Ray. He drove to the Ray building on Park Avenue himself, no driver, Carver riding with him because the alternative was going alone, and Carver had made his feelings about that clear with a single look that Adrian had decided to respect. They went up in an elevator that was all polished steel and indirect lighting, and arrived at the 32nd floor where a receptionist with very good posture told them Mr. Ray was unavailable. Tell him Adrian Voss is in the lobby, Adrian said. He'll be available. They waited 4 minutes. The receptionist spoke quietly into her headset and then looked up with the specific expression of someone who had been told something that surprised her and was managing it professionally. Mr. Ray will see you, she said. Douglas Ray's office was large and faced south, the full spread of lower Manhattan visible behind him when he stood at the window, which was where he was standing when Adrian walked in. A deliberate positioning, Adrian understood, designed to make you feel the weight of what the man owned and controlled. Ray was in his early 60s, well-maintained, silver at the temples, the kind of physical authority that came from decades of knowing you were the most important person in most rooms. He turned when Adrian entered. His expression was composed, not guilty, not defensive, something more interesting than either. The expression of a man who has been expecting a confrontation and has decided to receive it from a position of calm. Adrian, he said, I wondered when you'd come. I read the filing, Adrian said. He didn't sit. Carver stood near the door. I also read your emails with Hecht going back 22 months, like. Something shifted in Ray's face, very small, a micro-contraction around the eyes that was there and gone in less than a second. His daughter had sent those. He hadn't expected that. Claire, he said. Not a question. She called me this morning. Ray was quiet for a moment. He moved from the window to behind his desk, which was the positioning of a man who needed something between himself and the room. He didn't sit either. They faced each other across the desk's width. She doesn't understand the full picture of what I've been building. I think she understands it better than you'd prefer, Adrian said. She understands it well enough to go through your files and pull 22 months of correspondence and hand it to the person you've been running this against. He paused. That's not a failure of understanding. That's a moral position. Ray's jaw tightened slightly. I have an SEC filing in motion and a relationship with the Del Corvo family that creates significant structural pressure on your organization. You came here to negotiate. I came here to offer you one thing, Adrian said. Once. After this conversation, it doesn't exist anymore. Ray looked at him. Go ahead. You withdraw the filing. You sever the Del Corvo connection. You take the 11 million, keep it. I'm not asking for it back. And you walk away from any further involvement with the Voss organization or anyone connected to it. Your family's name stays clean. Isabella's situation is handled privately with no public embarrassment. Claire's involvement in this morning's call stays between the people in this room. He held Ray's gaze. You came into this looking to acquire leverage. I'm offering you a clean exit with the capital you extracted. That's better than what most people get when I find out what you've done. Ray studied him for a long moment. The city glittered behind him, unhelpful and enormous. And if I decline? Then I spend the next 6 months using every resource I have to expose the methodology behind the filing. I use the Hecht emails to demonstrate the filing was produced through a fraudulent scheme of manufactured trust. I introduce Claire's testimony. I turn the inquiry into an examination of how you operate, and I do it in every venue available to me: regulatory, civil, and the other kind." He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "You're a businessman, Douglas. You know what an extended public examination of your methods costs, not just in legal fees." Ray's face was doing careful work. The composed reception of the confrontation was intact, but something behind it was running calculations fast, the way a man's eyes move when he's adding numbers he doesn't entirely like. "The Del Corvo connection is not something I can simply sever by deciding to," Ray said. "They have expectations." "That's your problem to manage," Adrian said. "Same words I used with my mother yesterday, as it happens." A long silence. Ray looked at his desk. He picked up a pen and set it down, which was not a decision but a physical gesture of a man thinking, and Adrian watched it and waited. "I need 48 hours, Ray said. "You have 24. Ray looked up. "That's not enough time to—" "24 hours, Adrian said. "After that, I move." He turned toward the door. Carver opened it from the other side. Adrian stopped in the doorframe without turning back. "Tell Isabella I'm sorry about the way this went. She deserved better from both our families." He walked out without waiting for a response. Marco Del Corvo agreed to a meeting at 4 in the afternoon, which was itself information. A man who agrees to a same-day meeting is a man who is curious, and curiosity meant the situation was still in motion, not yet hardened into commitment. They met at a restaurant in Astoria that belonged to a cousin of Del Corvo's, a real restaurant that served real food and happened to have a private room in the back that the family used for conversations that didn't belong in offices. Marco Del Corvo was 54, broad, with the physical solidity of a man who had spent his life in confrontational situations and had stopped being impressed by them somewhere around his 35th year. He was eating when Adrian arrived. Actually eating, a plate of something with pasta and a glass of red wine. And he gestured to the seat across from him with his fork. "Sit," he said. "You want something?" "I'm fine." "Suit yourself." He ate a bite, chewed, set the fork down and looked at Adrian with the patient, assessing directness of a man who did not need to perform power because he simply had it. "You wanted to talk. Your people were outside a woman's apartment this morning," Adrian said. "Elena Marcelli, Carroll Gardens." Del Corvo looked at him. His face was pleasant and entirely unreadable. "I don't know what you're referring to." "Yes, you do," Adrian said. "And I'm not here to perform a confrontation about it. I'm here to tell you something directly, because I think you're a man who prefers directness." He held Del Corvo's gaze. "Whatever Douglas Ray offered you, it came with a cost he didn't disclose. He's sitting on 22 months of documentation that shows how he operates, how he manufactured his way into the Voss organization and built leverage through deception. That documentation is in my hands. If the Ray Del Corvo connection becomes relevant to any proceeding I'm involved in, that documentation becomes relevant too." He paused. "You've been patient about the territory question for 3 years. I respect that. What I'm telling you is that Ray is not a stable vehicle for what you're looking for, and aligning with him right now puts you inside a problem that is about to get very public." Del Corvo picked up his wine glass, turned it in his hand, set it down without drinking. "You're asking me to step back. I'm telling you the situation is unstable, and you're standing close to something that is about to collapse." "And the woman," Del Corvo said. "Marcelli." "She's under my protection," Adrian said. The words were quiet and absolutely flat. "Completely. Anyone who moves toward her moves toward me and everything that means." Del Corvo looked at him for a long time. The restaurant sounds continued around them. Kitchen noise, muffled conversation from the main room, the particular ambient warmth of a place that fed people. Del Corvo had the look of a man taking genuine measure, not performing it. "Ray approached me 6 weeks ago," Del Corvo said finally. "He described a situation where the Voss organization was going to be under significant pressure and suggested there might be opportunity in that." He paused. "I authorized surveillance on the Carroll Gardens location as an assessment. Nothing beyond that was authorized." He looked at Adrian steadily. "I want to be clear about that." "I appreciate the clarity." Ray is not my partner, Del Corvo said. He was a source of information about a situation I found interesting. If that information is compromised, he made a small gesture with his hand. My interest was always in the territory question, not in being a weapon for a man in a real estate dispute. Then we understand each other. We understand each other, Del Corvo said. He picked up his fork again. The surveillance ends today. Thank you, Adrian said. He stood. Voss. Del Corvo didn't look up from his plate. The territory question is still a question. I'm patient, but I'm not infinitely patient. I know, Adrian said. We'll have that conversation when this one is finished. He walked out through the restaurant into the sharp October afternoon and called Carver and said, Del Corvo is standing down, and heard the specific quality of Carver's exhale that meant something that had been tight had loosened one increment, and then he got in the car and drove to Tribeca. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building on a quiet block near the water, owned under a corporate structure that ran 4 entities deep and had no visible connection to the Voss name. He had kept it for 3 years without using it for anything except situations that required clean space, and it was furnished simply. A couch, a table, a kitchen that worked, windows that faced west and caught the late light. Elena was there when he arrived. Marcus was outside the door. Dee was inside, near the kitchen, and she gave Adrian a nod as she moved past him out the door with the particular professional discretion of someone who understands when to be absent. Elena was standing at the west window with her arms crossed, still in her work clothes from this morning, and she turned when he came in and looked at him with the specific expression she had when she had been sitting with something difficult for a long time and had processed it down to its essential components. You dealt with the Del Corvo situation, she said. For now. And Ray. He has 24 hours to withdraw the filing and close the connection. Do you think he will? He sat down on the couch. He put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment. I think he's a man who built this over 2 years and is now watching it come apart from 4 directions simultaneously. I think he'll do the math. She was quiet. She turned back to the window. The light was going amber outside, the Hudson catching it, the same light he'd watched from his office window a dozen times in different moods and situations, and never from this room. I can't go back to my apartment, she said. Not yet. How long is not yet? A week. Maybe less, once Ray moves. She nodded, small, controlled. I have work. Marcus can take you. He'll stay with you during the day and bring you back here at night. She turned from the window and looked at him. He was still on the couch, bent forward, and she looked at him the way she sometimes did when she was deciding what to say. Not calculating, just finding the true version of it. I'm not going to fall apart, she said. I want you to know that. I was scared this morning. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't scared, but I processed it, and I'm okay. I know you're okay. I also want you to know that I'm angry, she said. Not at you, at the situation, at the fact that I'm standing in an apartment I've never been to before because your mother opened a door and a man walked through it and decided my relationship with you was a useful tool. She held his gaze. I'm angry about that. You're entitled to be. I know I'm entitled, she said. I'm just telling you it's there so you're not reading something into it that isn't there. He looked up at her from the couch. What does it feel like? He said. Not the situation. What does this feel like for you right now? She held his gaze and considered the question with the same seriousness she considered everything. Like I made a choice 2 years ago to be with someone, and that choice was honest and good, and it is now costing me things I didn't sign up to pay, and I'm deciding in real time whether the person I made that choice for is worth what it's costing. She paused. That's what it feels like. The room was quiet. The amber light came through the window. He looked at her, and she looked back at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment that lasted long enough to have real weight in it. Is he? Adrian said. Worth it. She looked at him for a long, steady, undecorated moment. Ask me again in 48 hours, she said, and the way she said it was not cruel. It was honest, which was a different thing, and he understood the difference and accepted it without argument. He nodded. He stood up. He moved to the kitchen because they both needed to eat, and because the ordinary activity of it, opening cabinets, finding what was there, doing something with his hands, was the thing that kept him from standing in the middle of that room and feeling the full weight of what the last 48 hours had built. She came into the kitchen behind him. She looked over his shoulder at the cabinets. "There's pasta," she said, "and canned tomatoes. I can do that." "I know you can. I've seen you cook exactly once. It was reasonable." "Reasonable is the goal right now." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite, but almost. She pulled out a pot and handed it to him, and then sat at the kitchen table and watched him fill it at the sink, and the apartment settled around them into something that was not comfortable exactly, but was real. Two people in a borrowed room in a city that was doing whatever it was doing outside the windows, managing the space between them with the particular care of people who understood that the space mattered. His phone buzzed at 8:47. He looked at it. A message from Park, his attorney. "Ray's lawyer contacted us. He wants to discuss terms of withdrawal. We'll call in the morning." He read it twice. He set the phone face down on the counter and went back to the stove. "Something," Elena said from the table, watching him. "Ray blinked," he said. She absorbed that. She looked at the table, then she looked up at him. "Is it over?" He stirred the sauce and looked at the pot and thought about Marco del Corvo eating pasta in Astoria, about Victoria's voice on the phone stripped of its certainty, about Claire Ray going through her father's files in the early morning, about 22 months of emails that had mapped the exact geography of what Adrian valued and built a plan around dismantling it. "The worst of it," he said. "The worst of it is over." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Come sit down when that's ready, and stop hovering over the stove. You're going to burn it." He didn't burn it. He brought 2 plates to the table and sat across from her, and they ate in the borrowed apartment with the city outside and the amber light gone to gray, and then to the particular dark blue of a New York evening. And it was not a normal dinner, and nothing about it was uncomplicated, but it was real, and they were in it together, and that counted for something. Counted, in fact, for more than he knew how to say in any room, borrowed or otherwise. His phone lit up at 9:22. He glanced at it from across the table, expecting Park or Carver or another operational update from a day that had not stopped producing them. The screen showed Victoria's name. He stared at it for a second. Across the table, Elena had seen his face change, and she was watching him with quiet attention. He picked up the phone. He answered it. "Victoria." His mother's voice on the other end was not the recalibrated voice of the morning or the stripped voice of the afternoon phone call. It was something else, but lower, with a roughness in it that he had not heard before, and that stopped something in him. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need to tell you before Carver finds it, because he's going to find it, and I would rather you hear it from me." He pushed back from the table very slightly. Elena sat still. "Tell me." "The Callaway counterparty," Victoria said. "The one I disclosed to Ray. I told you I gave him general information." A pause. And in it something that in another person might have been described as a tremor. "I didn't give him general information. I gave him the name, the specific name of the person on the other side of the arrangement, their full identity." The bottom of something dropped. "Victoria," he said, and his voice had gone somewhere very quiet and very precise. "Who knows that name?" "Ray has it, and if Ray gave it to the Del Corvo people, who knows that name?" "I don't know how far it's traveled," she said. "That's what I'm telling you. I don't know." He stood up from the table. He turned away from Elena because he needed to move, and he needed 2 seconds without being looked at. He walked to the window. The city was dark and lit and enormous outside, and the person on the other side of the Callaway arrangement, the person whose identity being public would collapse not just the financial structure, but the personal safety of someone who had trusted the Voss organization with their name, was somewhere in that city right now, not knowing. "I'm calling you back," he said to Victoria. "Adrian?" He hung up. He stood at the window with the phone in his hand and felt the thing he had been managing all day, the controlled, operational, forward-moving version of himself that dealt with problems in sequence and made decisions without feeling them fully, come into hard contact with something it could not simply process and move past. Behind him, Elena's chair scraped the floor. Her footsteps. She stopped a few feet away. "What happened?" she said. He turned around. He looked at her in the kitchen light of the borrowed apartment and he said, "I need to make some calls. There's something I missed, something I didn't know to look for, and it's—" He stopped. "It's serious." She looked at him, looked at his face. "How serious?" He held her gaze, and for the first time in 2 days, he did not reach for the controlled, managed, contained version of the answer. He said the actual thing. "Someone is going to get hurt if I don't move right now," he said. "Someone who trusted me and has nothing to do with any of this." Elena didn't hesitate. She crossed to the table and picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd draped it when they sat down to eat, and she brought it to him and held it out and said, "Then go." He took the jacket. He looked at her. The bare fact of her, standing in a borrowed kitchen in the middle of a situation she had not chosen, handing him his jacket because someone needed him, and that was sufficient reason. "Marcus is outside," he said. "I know," she said. "Go." He went. The door closed behind him and he was already on the phone before he reached the elevator, already moving, already building the next 60 minutes in his head, because someone on the other side of a financial arrangement made in good faith was about to find out how far Douglas Ray's damage had actually. The elevator took 4 seconds to arrive and he was inside it before the doors were fully open, phone already to his ear, calling Carver, who answered on the first ring because Carver had been awake for 16 hours and showed no signs of stopping. "The Calloway counterparty," Adrian said. "Victoria gave Ray the full identity, name, everything. I need you to find out right now how far that name has traveled. Whether Ray passed it to the Del Corvo people, whether it's appeared anywhere in any communication we can access. And I need someone physically at that person's location inside of 30 minutes. A half-second pause. "I need the name," Carver said. "Nathan Rice. He's in the West Village, Park and Bleecker, the building on the northeast corner, apartment 11C. He's a city planner. He has no idea any of this exists." 30 minutes, Carver said, and hung up. Adrian came out of the building into the cold October night and got into the car that Marcus had left at the curb. Dee had taken it and left the keys at the building's front desk per the protocol, which was the kind of operational precision Adrian paid for and rarely needed to think about. He drove himself. He needed the control of it, the specific physical engagement of hands on wheel and eyes on street that kept the interior noise from becoming the only thing. Nathan Rice was 41 years old. He was a city planner with the municipal office who had, 6 years ago, found himself in a position where the pressure of significant personal debt had intersected with an opportunity the Voss organization had quietly presented. Not coercion, not a threat, simply a door left open in a hallway Nathan was already standing in. He had walked through it and taken the money had solved the problem, and he had not heard from the Voss organization in a meaningful way in 4 years. He had a daughter who was 8 and a wife who taught elementary school, and an apartment in the West Village with a window box she maintained through the spring and summer that was bare now in October, the dirt dry, the season done. Adrian knew these details because when you put someone in a position of exposure, you made it your business to understand what they had to lose. Nathan Rice had substantial things to lose. He had lost sleep over the Calloway connection for 6 years and had probably told himself, in the way people told themselves things, that it was behind him, that it was over, that the knock on the door was not coming. The knock was coming. Adrian was going to make sure it came from him rather than from anyone else. He arrived at the West Village building at 9:47. Carver's man, a quiet, capable person named Osei, who had worked sensitive situations for the organization for 4 years, was already in the lobby, which meant he had made it in 31 minutes, and Adrian did not penalize the extra 60 seconds. "Anyone approach the building?" Adrian said. "Negative," Osei said. "I've been here 12 minutes. Nothing." "Stay down here. Watch the entrance." He went up alone. 11C was at the end of a corridor that smelled of someone's dinner, garlic, something warm, and he stood in front of the door for a moment and thought about how to do this, which was the part of the evening's work that no operational precision could fully prepare you for. Then he knocked. The man who opened the door was wearing a sweatshirt and glasses pushed up on his forehead, with the look of someone who had been reading or working and had not expected company. He was ordinary looking in the specific way that people were ordinary when they lived ordinary lives around a single extraordinary secret. He looked at Adrian. He went pale. "Mr. Voss," Nathan Rice said. "I need to come in," Adrian said. "I need about 20 minutes of your time, and then I'm going to leave and I'm going to tell you something that is going to be unpleasant, but that you need to know tonight. Can I come in?" Rice stepped back. He let him in. The apartment was warm and lived in. Books, a child's drawing on the refrigerator visible from the entry, the dinner smell stronger inside. A woman's voice from somewhere in the back said something about the dishwasher, and then went quiet when it didn't get an answer. "My wife," Rice said. "You don't need to involve her in this conversation," Adrian said. "But I'll leave that to you." Rice made a decision. He called down the hall that he had a work thing, that it would be 20 minutes, that she should go ahead. Adrian heard the murmur of acknowledgement, and then a door, and then quiet. They sat at the kitchen table. Rice had the particular stillness of a man whose worst anticipation had just materialized and who was managing it by not moving. "Tell me," Rice said. Adrian told him. All of it. The Ray approach, Victoria's disclosure, the SEC filing, what his name being in Ray's possession meant in terms of exposure. He told it clean, no softening, because Nathan Rice was an adult who had made a choice 6 years ago and lived with it and was owed the truth about what that choice currently meant for his situation. Rice listened without interrupting. When Adrian was done, he took off his glasses and set them on the table and looked at the tabletop for a long moment. "How exposed am I?" he said. It was the same question Elena had asked from the front steps, in the same practical tone, and it hit Adrian in the same place. Right now, significantly, the SEC has a preliminary filing that doesn't name you, but contains enough structural information that a competent investigator will find the thread. He paused. "My legal team is working on a challenge to the filing's validity based on the fraudulent circumstances under which the information was obtained. If that challenge succeeds, and I believe it will, the thread goes away." Another pause. "But I needed you to know tonight rather than reading about it somewhere and not understanding what you were reading." Rice sat with that. He put his glasses back on. He looked at Adrian. "You came here yourself," he said. "Yes." "You could have sent someone." "I could have," Adrian said. "You've been carrying this for 6 years. You carried it because you trusted that the organization would not let it become a problem for you. It became a problem. That's on my family. I came myself because of that." The sound of the building around them, elevator somewhere, a television through a wall, the specific nighttime breath of a building full of people not aware of the particular conversation happening in 11C. Rice looked at his hands on the table. "My daughter," he said. Not to Adrian specifically, just out loud. "The goal of everything I'm doing right now is that your daughter never has any reason to know this conversation happened," Adrian said. "That's not a promise I can make with certainty, but it is the objective." Rice nodded. Small, slow. "What do I need to do?" "Tonight, nothing. Tomorrow, call the number I'm going to give you and speak to a woman named Park. She's my lead attorney. She's going to give you specific guidance, and she's going to make sure you have personal representation that is separate from our organizational representation. You need your own lawyer in this. I'll cover the cost." "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to," Adrian said. "I'm doing it." Rice was quiet again, then, "Is this going to be over, eventually?" Adrian looked at him. "Yes," he said. "Not quickly, but yes." He left 11C at 10:23. In the lobby, Osei fell in beside him, and Adrian told him to maintain watch on the building through the night and to expect relief in the morning. Osei nodded, and Adrian went back to the car and sat in it for a moment on the dark West Village street with his hands on the wheel and the engine off, and felt the day. The full compressive weight of it, from the SEC alert at 6:43 to the kitchen in the Tribeca apartment to Marco Del Corvo's restaurant, to Nathan Rice's face when he'd opened the door, settle over him all at once. He was very tired. Not the operational tiredness that he pushed through and passed and had been pushing through for 38 years. Something underneath that. He drove back to Tribeca. Elena was asleep on the couch when he came in, which she had not intended. He could tell from the way she was positioned, still in her work clothes, a pillow pulled from somewhere, the book she'd apparently found on the shelf lying open face down on the floor where it had slid. He stood in the doorway of the living room and looked at her for a moment in the low light. The specific, unguarded quality of a person asleep, the absence of all the controlled precision and managed steadiness she wore through every waking hour. He got the blanket from the bedroom and put it over her without waking her, and went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water standing at the sink and looked out the window at the dark water of the Hudson. Nathan Rice had a child's drawing on his refrigerator, a woman who thought about the window box when the season came around. 6 years of carrying a secret that had now been made dangerous by a man who had used it as one tile in a very large mosaic of exploitation. Adrian pressed the glass against the counter and thought about what his mother had said on the phone. "I would rather you hear it from me." He thought about what it had cost her to make that call, not in terms of pride, though that was real, but in terms of the thing she had been most certain of, the thing she had organized her entire operational identity around, which was that she saw things clearly, saw the full picture, was never the one being used. Douglas Ray had walked through the door she'd opened and had used her love for her son as a precision instrument, and she had not seen it until it was too late, and now she was sitting wherever she was sitting tonight. Knowing that the most significant damage of the last 48 hours had come from the information she had handed over in the genuine belief that she was protecting the family. That was not a small thing to sit with. He put the glass in the sink and went to the armchair across from the couch and sat in it and closed his eyes. And at some point between that moment and morning, he slept. Ray's attorneys called Park at 8:15 the next morning. By 10 o'clock, the framework of the withdrawal was in place. The SEC filing would be retracted on grounds that the submitting party had identified material errors in the information provided, a face-saving language that was technically accurate in the sense that Ray had not disclosed that the information was obtained through a manufactured relationship, which constituted a material procedural defect in the filing. Park had spent an hour on the phone building the language and came off the call with the expression of someone who had gotten 90% of what they'd asked for and was professionally satisfied without being celebratory. "The retraction goes in today," she told Adrian. "The SEC will process it within a week. The preliminary inquiry designation gets lifted and no public record of investigation remains." And Rice. "The thread disappears with the filing. He's not named anywhere in the existing record. As far as the SEC is concerned, the Callaway structure is a footnote on a retracted inquiry." She paused. "It's not a perfect outcome. The structural vulnerability in Callaway still exists and will need to be properly wound down over the next 12 to 18 months. But the acute danger is gone." "Ray's terms for the withdrawal," he said. "He keeps the $11 million. The Voss organization acknowledges no wrongdoing, and neither does the Ray family. The Delaware LLC structures are dissolved over 60 days. She paused. "And he asked that Claire's involvement not be disclosed." "I agreed to that on the phone yesterday," Adrian said. "It holds." Park nodded. She gathered her papers. "One more thing. Douglas Ray sent a personal message, not through counsel. He said to tell you," she looked at a note on her legal pad, "that your mother is a remarkable woman and that he is sorry to have wasted her. His words." Adrian looked at her. "Don't pass that on," he said. "I wasn't planning to," Park said. Bocha. He told Victoria in person. He drove to the 14th floor at noon. She was there, which meant she had been there all morning, which meant she had not been able to stay away from the building that was her professional identity, even after he'd told her she needed to leave it, which he had expected, and had decided to address separately from everything else. She was at her desk. The composed armor was back, but differently fitted than before. Still present, but sitting on something that had shifted underneath it, the way clothing fits differently after you've lost weight. He told her about the withdrawal. He told her about Nathan Rice and the West Village apartment and the child's drawing on the refrigerator. He told her about Osei in the lobby and Park's morning call and the language of the retraction and what it meant for the Callaway exposure. He told her all of it with the same directness he'd given Elena and Rice and everyone else in the last 24 hours, because he had decided somewhere in the armchair in the Tribeca apartment that managing what people received was the thing that had caused most of the damage in this entire situation, and he was done with it. Victoria listened to all of it without speaking. When he was finished, she turned toward the window for a moment. Her hands were in her lap. He could see the side of her face, the sharp line of her jaw, the silver of her hair, the particular set of someone who is deciding what is real. "Nathan Rice," she said. "I knew about Callaway in general terms. I didn't know who the counterparty was when I spoke to Ray." She turned to look at him. "When I gave him the name, I thought he was—" She stopped. Started again. "I thought I was demonstrating that we had nothing to hide from a partner, that transparency was a gesture of good faith." "He used it as collateral," Adrian said, "like everything else." "Yes." She was quiet. "A man who has a child," she said. Not quite to Adrian. "Yes." She looked at her desk, at her hands. "I could have, if I had told you about Ray when he first approached me." "Yes," Adrian said. "You could have." She absorbed that. She didn't argue with it or qualify it. She sat with the full weight of it in a way he had not seen her sit with something since his father's funeral, when she had stood at the graveside for a long time after everyone else had moved toward the cars, just standing there in the gray morning, letting the reality of it touch her. "I'm going to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to answer it honestly, not defensively." She looked at him. "When Ray approached you, when he started talking about Elena, about her being a risk, about the organization needing strength, did any part of you think, this man is telling me what I already want to hear?" A very long silence. Outside the window, the city was doing its impervious midday thing, indifferent to the conversation in the 14th floor corner office. "Yes," Victoria said finally. The word was quiet and cost something. "Some part of me knew." He nodded. He had not known, going into this conversation, whether she would say that. The fact that she did was the first thing in several days that felt like actual ground beneath him rather than the surface of something that might give way. "Then that's what we're working from," he said. "Not the justifications, not the strategy, that." She looked at him steadily. "What does that mean, practically?" "It means we have a different conversation than we've been having for 2 years. About the organization, about what you want your role in it to be, about Elena." He held her gaze. "Not today, but soon." She said nothing. Then, "She must be angry." "She's not performing anger," he said, "which is different." "That doesn't surprise me," Victoria said quietly, and in the way she said it there was something he had not heard from her in regard to Elena before. Not warmth, not yet, but the absence of the dismissal. The first small withdrawal of it. "She doesn't perform anything, does she?" "No," he said. "She doesn't." Victoria looked at her window again. The silence stretched to something that was not uncomfortable but was full. 2 people in a room that had held a number of difficult conversations in the last several days, letting this one breathe at its own pace. "I'll clear the floor," she said finally, "by the end of the month." "That's not a punishment," he said. "I want you to understand that." "I know," she said. "I think I need some distance from this building to see what I've been doing clearly. That's not your doing, that's mine." She paused. "I would like eventually to have a conversation with Elena, if she's willing." "I'll ask her," he said. "I can't promise anything." "I'm not asking for a promise," Victoria said. "I'm asking for the possibility." He looked at his mother, the silver hair, the sharp eyes, the face of a woman who had held a name and an organization together through grief and pressure and fear for longer than most people had held anything, and who had, in the process, made the particular error of people who love something so much they cannot tell anymore where the love ends and the control begins. He thought about what Claire Ray had said. She genuinely believed it. He thought about the 22 months of Hecht's emails, the underlined notation, the door that had been identified and entered. He thought about the woman who had taught him, among other things, that the gap between what people said and what they wanted was where the real information lived. The woman who had not been able to see when someone was reading that gap in her. "The possibility exists," he said. He left the office. In the elevator going up, he leaned against the back wall and looked at the ceiling and breathed once, slowly, the way you breathed when something that had been compressed for a long time had finally been given slightly more room. Elena went back to Carroll Gardens 4 days later. Ose walked her through the apartment when she returned. Not dramatically, just a thorough and quiet check that she stood in the hallway for, and then thanked him for, with the specific directness she thanked everyone for things, which was to look at the person and say the words and mean them. After he left, she stood in her own kitchen for a moment. The bakery down the street had opened at 5, same as always. The apartment smelled like itself. Books and the particular dry warmth of her radiator, which she'd had a running argument with the building super about for 2 years. Everything in its place. Nothing visibly changed. She sat down at the kitchen table and put her hands flat on it and looked at the wall for a while. Adrian came that evening with food he'd bought from a place on Atlantic Avenue that she'd mentioned once, months ago, in passing, because she liked their roast chicken and the way they did the potatoes. He set it on the counter, and she looked at it and then looked at him. "You remembered that," she said. "You mentioned it in March," he said. "You said the potatoes were the best you'd had since your grandmother made them." She looked at the bag on the counter, then she turned and leaned against the counter with her arms crossed and looked at him in the middle of her kitchen. And her expression was the one she had in the Tribeca apartment when she'd said, "Ask me again in 48 hours, but resolved now. Landed somewhere." "Sit down," she said. He sat. She got plates from the cabinet and brought the food to the table and sat across from him and served both plates with the efficient, unpretentious practicality that was one of the most specifically hers things about her. Then she looked at him. "I've been thinking," she said. "I know." "Stop knowing things before I say them," she said, and there was something in it, not quite a smile, but the shape that a smile came from, which was enough. "I've been thinking about what I said, in the Tribeca apartment, that you should ask me again." "And?" She picked up her fork. She looked at the plate for a moment, then back at him. "I'm still here," she said. "That's the answer. I thought about it. Really thought about it. Not just processed the crisis, but actually sat with whether I wanted to be here, and I'm still here. That's what I want you to know." He held her gaze. "Okay," he said. "It's not going to be simple," she said. "I know that. I'm not simple-minded about it. There are going to be things that happen in your world that are going to reach mine, and I'm going to have to keep deciding whether the person is worth what it costs. That's what I signed up for, whether I fully understood it or not, 2 years ago." She paused. "But I need something from you." "Tell me." "I need you to stop managing what I know," she said. "I said it in the kitchen that first night, and I'm saying it again because I need it to be the operating principle, not just a thing we agreed to in a crisis. If something is happening that involves me, or could involve me, I need to know, not a managed version of it, the actual thing." "Yes," he said, "and I need you to be a person with me," she said. "Not a crisis manager, not someone running contingencies. A person who eats dinner and sleeps and tells me when something is hard. I can handle the hard things. I have been handling them. I just need you to let me be the person who handles them with you rather than the person you're protecting from them." He was quiet for a moment. The kitchen was warm. The radiator was making its familiar, argumentative sound. Outside the window, the street had settled into its early evening routine. Someone's dog, a kid on a bike, the bakery dark and locked until 5 tomorrow morning. "I hear you," he said. She held his gaze, making sure he meant it the way she meant it. Not as acknowledgement of a request, but as an actual commitment, taken up and owned. He held it back the same way. "Okay," she said. She picked up her fork again. "The chicken's going cold." He picked up his fork. They ate. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon, Adrian was in his office when his assistant told him Victoria was downstairs and wanted to know if he had 30 minutes. He said yes. She came up and sat in the chair across from his desk. Not the chair at the conference table, the chair directly across, the one that was used for direct conversations rather than working meetings. She was dressed simply, and her silver hair was as sharp as always, and she set her bag beside the chair and looked at him. "I've moved my things out of the 14th floor," she said. "Robert is staying on. I hope that's all right. He's been there long enough that I didn't want to displace him." "Robert stays," Adrian said. "He was always more ours than yours." Something crossed her face. Almost amusement, almost. "Fair." "How is it?" he said. "Being out of the building." She considered the question with more seriousness than a deflecting person would have. "Strange," she said. "I've been here for 20 years. The building knows my rhythm. Being outside of it..." She paused. "I've been seeing more of the city. I walk in the mornings now. I hadn't done that in a long time." "That's good." "Yes," she said. "I think it is." She looked at her hands briefly. "I spoke with Isabella Ray." He hadn't known that. "When?" "Last week. I reached out to her directly. I thought she deserved to hear from me personally about the circumstances. Not the full operational detail, but enough that she understood that what her father built, he built without her knowledge and without consideration for what it meant for her life." Victoria looked up. She was gracious. More gracious than I would have been. "What did she say?" "She said she'd suspected for a long time that her father saw her primarily as an instrument. That this confirmed it, but didn't surprise her." Victoria paused. "She said she hoped I found my way through." Adrian was quiet. He thought about Isabella Ray, who had appeared in this story as a name on a cream-colored card and had never been a person in it until this moment. He thought about Claire Ray and her father's files at 6 in the morning, deciding she was done. "You did a good thing," he said to his mother. "I did a necessary thing," she said, "which is not the same. I have a lot of necessary things to do before I get to the good ones." She looked at him directly. "I would like to have dinner, the three of us, if Elena is willing." "I'll ask her." "I'm not asking for her forgiveness," Victoria said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not going to sit across a dinner table and ask a woman I treated badly to forgive me, because that makes the dinner about my comfort, not hers. I just want to be in the same room, start somewhere that isn't where we've been." He looked at his mother, the sharp eyes, the silver, the woman beneath the architecture of it, which he was beginning to see more clearly as the architecture shifted, or rather, as he stopped only looking at the architecture and started looking for what had always been inside it. "I'll ask her," he said again. Victoria stood. She picked up her bag. She moved to the door and then stopped. "One more thing," she said without turning around. "Yeah. Your father would have handled this badly," she said. "He was a brilliant man and he loved us, but he would have managed this situation with force, and it would have made everything worse." She paused. "You handled it differently. I want you to know I see that." She left. The door closed. He sat for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Elena. She answered on the third ring. He could hear the midtown ambient sound that meant she was on her lunch break again, outside, the city going about its indifferent business around her. "Hey," she said. "My mother wants to have dinner," he said. "The three of us. She's not asking for your forgiveness, and she said to tell you that explicitly. She just wants to start somewhere." A pause. He heard her move, shift, find a quieter spot on whatever midtown corner she was standing on. "She told you to tell me she's not asking for forgiveness." "Verbatim." Another pause. "That's the most honest thing she's ever said about me," Elena said. "Yeah," he said. "I think she's working on that." He heard Elena breathing for a moment, the particular quality of her when she was thinking about something real rather than processing a crisis. Then she said, "Tell her yes. Once. And tell her I'm not going to be easy about it. I'll tell her exactly that." "Good," Elena said. And then, in a tone that had returned to the ordinary register they lived in, when the city was just the city and the situation was just life. "I have to go back in. I have a site review at 2. "Go," he said. "Adrian." "Yeah." She didn't say anything for a second, just the city around her and the breath of it and whatever she was looking at on that corner. "We're okay," she said. "I just want to say that. We're okay." He looked out his window at the city, the Hudson, the grid, the October light that had gone from amber to the particular flat gold of a late afternoon In a year that had cost him things he was still counting. "Yeah," he said. "We are." She hung up. He sat for a while longer with the phone in his hand and the city outside and the building around him. The same building he had always occupied, the same name on the door, the same operational machinery running through 42 floors beneath and around him. It was all the same and nothing was the same, which was not a paradox but just the ordinary texture of time moving through a life. Douglas Ray's withdrawal had processed through the SEC. The preliminary inquiry designation was lifted. Nathan Rice had received a call from Park and had met with his own attorney and had gone home to an apartment with a child's drawing on the refrigerator and a window box that would have something in it again in the spring. The Callaway structure was being carefully and permanently wound down over the agreed 18-month timeline. Marco Del Corvo had, as promised, ended his surveillance of Carroll Gardens, and the territorial conversation that remained between the Voss organization and the Del Corvo family was scheduled for the new year, when both sides would sit at a table and negotiate something that looked like a sustainable arrangement rather than a slow collision. The Voss organization was still standing. It was standing differently than it had stood a month ago, with some things removed from its foundation that had looked like structural supports and had in fact been pressure points, and with some things added that were harder to name but had to do with the particular quality of a structure that had been tested and had not collapsed. Victoria walked in the mornings now. Elena had gone back to Carroll Gardens, and the bakery opened at 5, and the radiator made its sound, and the November light came through her west-facing window in the late afternoon, and sat on the books on her shelves the way November light did. And Adrian Voss sat in his office at the end of a day that was ordinary in the way that only days following extraordinary ones could be, fully, quietly, weight-bearingly ordinary. And let the city do what it did, which was to continue, indifferent and enormous, and full of people living in the gap between what they were and what they were trying to become. The same gap he had been living in his whole life, and had finally, at 38, on the other side of a month that had taken something from him and given something back in its place, decided to stop trying to close. The window held the last of the light. The Hudson went dark beneath it. The grid of the city came on, block by block, the 10,000 lit windows of people who did not know his name and would not, people living their ordinary lives in the same city he had always occupied from above, and was only now beginning, slowly, without ceremony or announcement, to inhabit from the inside. He turned off his desk lamp. He picked up his jacket. He took the elevator down.